Now on BBC World News, Zainab Badawi travels to the country of her birth and the region of her forefathers, northern Sudan, to examine a little-known aspect of ancient African history, the Kingdom of Kush, in episode 4 of our landmark 9-part series, History of Africa.
Kush in northern Sudan is one of the forgotten kingdoms of Africa and the ancient world. The kings of Kush reached the zenith of their power in the 8th century BC when they conquered their neighbor Egypt, and their influence extended as far as the modern-day Middle East. Sudan's capital, Khartoum, where the Blue and White Niles meet. The waters of the two rivers merge to form the mighty River Nile that flows through northern Sudan into Egypt and ends its journey there, where it joins the Mediterranean Sea. The Blue Nile starts deep in the Ethiopian highlands, and the waters of the White Nile flow from Lake Victoria in East Africa, although it probably originates from deeper inside Central Africa. The River Nile has for centuries played silent witness to the great civilizations that existed close to its banks. An unexpected game of football in the town of Karima in northern Sudan. The youngsters laugh, quite rightly, at my lack of goalkeeping skills. Personally, I don't think I'm that bad for a woman of a certain age. As I try to bridge the generation gap, so too does the town of Karima. It reaches down through the generations to a time long gone by when it was known as Kerma. And it is here that we begin the story of the Kingdom of Kush. Early humans existed in Sudan for tens of thousands of years. By about 5000 BC, we know that people in northern Sudan lived from fishing, hunting, and basic farming. And there's evidence that they raised cattle too. They lived in relatively small, independent and separate population groups. They had to be mobile so they could find good pasture for their livestock. The rich waters of the River Nile made the land fertile, which meant crops could grow easily, so farmers could settle down and develop communities. The climate began to dry out gradually, starting from about 5000 BC across northern Africa, including what is today Sudan. This drove more people into the Nile Valley in search of hospitable land. It meant there were larger centers of population which became urbanized, and a hierarchy of chiefs or princes developed. By around 2500 BC, Kerma had become the center for the people who came to be known as the Kushites. Their buildings include large structures called dafufas, which stood up to 18 meters high. The ancient site of Kerma comprises two striking edifices, both built of sun-dried mud brick. They're known as the Western and Eastern Dufufa. Behind me is the Western Dufufa, which is believed to have been a temple. The Eastern Dufufa is a funerary chapel surrounded by a cemetery of mound graves. Archaeologist and historian Dr. Abdulrahman Ali is director of Sudan's National Museum in the capital, Khartoum.
The two Dafufas in Kerma, these are two monumental mud brick monuments. They belong to the Kingdom of Kerma, which was known as the first independent national kingdom in the Sudan, developed in 2500 BC. And the kings of Kerma, they ruled Kerma for almost 1,000 years. And Kerma was known as the first and big urban center in the sub-Saharan Africa. And these two monuments, they were used as temples, used by the local community and the kings. And in this monument, we could find the first indication of the utilization of the brick in the Nile Valley, that is in Kerma. An important fact about Kerma is that Kerma, during that time, it acts as a national symbol and united all the tribes of the Sudan in one agglomeration.
We learn something about the inhabitants of Kerma from their death rituals, their customs, and what kind of objects they made and used. The traditional Kerma grave, like this one, is marked by a dome-shaped tumulus of earth, outlined by a ring of black stones sprinkled over with white pebbles. The body was placed on the south side of the burial chamber. There was also pottery in the grave. Dr. Shadia Taha is a Sudanese archaeologist teaching at Cambridge University in England.
Pottery is always abundant in all archaeological sites because it doesn't decay and it survives in all environments and climates. Pottery found in Sudan gave us information about the Neolithic groups who lived in Sudan at that time, Bronze Age groups, and Iron Age groups. We know a lot of deal about the clays they use, the techniques they use, the styles, the decoration. It tells us about the complexity of the ceramics. It tells us about trade and exchange. And what we know now, that pottery was found in Sudan at 8,000 BCE.
The National Museum in Khartoum has many exhibits from ancient Sudan. Between 1780 to 1580 BC, Kerma culture was vibrant. The people wore beautiful jewelry. They had bronze mirrors, stoneware, and delicate pottery. Some experts believe the ancient Sudanese were the first to develop the technique of enameling pottery. This period of ancient Sudan's history is linked to that of its neighbor to the north, Egypt. At about the same time in ancient Egypt, that is around 3000 BC, the first dynasties were establishing the rule of the pharaohs. What was the relationship like between these two close kingdoms? It was both hostile and complementary. And over the centuries, the balance of power would shift from one to the other. As Shadia Taha explains, in the writing of history, mostly by Western scholars, the importance of ancient Sudan in this relationship has been rather overlooked.
Both countries influence each other, but the Eurocentric group, they always thought of Kerma as younger than Egypt and always copying Egypt. But they didn't give Kerma the credit it deserves because Kerma was a very advanced state, and its civilization predated Babylon, Rome, and Greece. So the exchange of ideas went both ways. It wasn't just a receiver of ideas from Egypt.
When relations were bad, the pharaohs of Egypt would launch raids into Kerma, and the people of Kerma also raided the Egyptians. However, when their relationship was good, trade flourished between the two kingdoms. Donkeys were used as pack animals. Unlike camels, they need a lot of water, so that supports the theory that at this time, the climate in northern Sudan was more green and humid than it is today. As well as moving goods overland, they transported them along the Nile on boats that were later dismantled. The wood was reused in Egypt for building. But trade was hampered at certain times of the year when the Nile was impassable because of its cataracts.
There are 6 cataracts in the river. The first of them is here at this very spot in Aswan in southern Egypt. The other 5 are in modern-day Sudan. And as you can see behind me, cataracts are rock formations in the river. And this meant that boats and ships would crash into them unless the waters of the Nile were high enough for them to avoid doing so. That meant that for a large part of the year, the waters of the River Nile were not navigable. So traders would have to use overland routes, and this was more arduous and took a longer time.
Throughout history, the cataracts on the Nile gave the people of ancient Sudan a good natural defense from attackers coming by boat. Kerma laid the bedrock for the civilization of the Kushites.
Kush was well known for its very powerful army. They were very fierce archers, and the Egyptians called them the land of the bow because of their skills in the bow. So they know their ability and their strength and their power. In 1650, the Kushites ransacked Egypt, but they just went back. Kush was a powerful state, and the Egyptians feared Kush.
So during this period of history, the Kushites succeeded in increasing their control of trans-African trade through the Sahara to the detriment of Egypt. For thousands of years, camel trains have made this journey from the south across the Sahara to Egypt. These camels are resting by the roadside and taking water in Dongola, in territory that would have been part of the Kingdom of Kush.
Kush was a vital crossroads for trade in the ancient world, linking the west and the east in the Red Sea, and then from the south to the north in the Mediterranean.
The overland route through the hot terrain was difficult in the past and still is today. This man tells me they've ridden from Darfur in western Sudan and are on their way to Cairo. That's a distance of nearly 2,000 kilometers.
40 يوم 45 يوم وانت بادي من وين؟ على السلامة.
I wish him well on his journey to Egypt and bid him goodbye. Trade across land and along the Nile was, of course, a critical source of wealth, and so the Egyptians wanted to regain control of this trade route to restore their fortunes. By 1550 BC, ancient Egypt was at the start of a new golden age, and powerful rulers like Queen Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III made it their mission to build up Egypt's trade again. Tutmosis III sent an army up the Nile and defeated the people at Kerma. Now Egypt could take full advantage and exploit the kingdom's resources. When eventually the Egyptians retreated and ceased to control Kerma, a new kingdom arose further south from Kerma in Napata, or Nabta as the Sudanese call it.
My own opinion, they moved to Nabta for economic, political, and religious reasons. Economic reasons because Nabta was a meeting place for trade. The population was growing. They were already urban. They needed more resources. More resources were available in those to supply an increasing population. and religious reason. Jabal Barkal is a sacred mountain which Egyptians and Kushites believe that Amun resides in Jabal Barkal.
The god Amun-Ra.
The god Amun-Ra. So it is sacred for the Egyptians and the Kushites.